Bonjour, bonsoir, dear friends. Welcome to JCB Live. This is In the Winery. Our fantastic director of winemaking, Brian Maloney.
Cheers.
We are tasting and toasting with something amazing.
Well, it is the Private Reserve Pinot Noir, the pride of our French oak vats here in the cellars of Buena Vista.
So, dear friends, we are living the most majestuous moment in life. This is when the grapes come in and they're finally going to give the best that they've promised us for 11 months. It's even much better than giving birth. It's the enlightenment of many decades of a vineyard growing, the terroir giving the essence of its roots, its soil, its spiritual, emotional presence, and now we're going to be transforming those beautiful grapes. So we're tasting the Private Reserve. This is Pinot Noir, and with Pinot Noir, what we do as a tradition at Buena Vista and the Loge, all our Pinot wineries, is we make Pinot in those magnificent open-top wood fermenter. So Brian, explain us the art, the science of why wood, why open-top, and everything else.
Well, John Charles, we use these beautiful wood vats because it really provides just the perfect environment for the native yeasts that are coming in on those grapes, as well as that live here in these ancient cellars to do that transformation, to make these grapes into wine. As winemakers, we don't make wine. All we do is harness the environment so that we can make beautiful wine out of those grapes, using the yeast as really the workers in it.
So you accompany the grapes into their adolescence.
We guide them. We're much more a teacher, so to speak, than the parent.
I'm going to call you professor from now on. It's going to be Professor Maloney. So, dear friends, born in Vougeot, in the heart of Pinot Noir, the motherland of Grand Cru, the monks, the Cistercian monks, since the 12th century, where the Count actually went and got inspired for his Pinot Noir in the 1860s, he as well, at the time, bought the same tanks. Those monks have always used round and oval-shaped tanks. Two different types of shape for the energy they generate, the mass relationship to the volume. So that's why we call them typically 4 tons, 6 tons. With Pinot, we don't like to go to 8 tons.
Well, it gets too hot. So that's energy is literally what's going on here. When the yeast do their fermentation, they create heat. And if it gets too hot, they'll actually stop the fermentation and arrest it, and then we have a big problem. So that's why we have these oval shapes. It allows the heat of the fermentation to express itself out more evenly. And as you get to a larger fermentation, it becomes a little bit more risky. So that's why we don't like to go above that 8 tons, like John Charles mentioned.
So we're going to show you as we're going to go inside. But what is so exciting, and you can see that I'm shivering with pleasure, this is my favorite time. The grapes arrive, we let them sit for a few days, and slowly but surely we're going to start to see some bubbles. We're going to start to see some CO2, a little bit, and this is fermentation starting. And this is the time where we observe the beautiful color, the skin contacts, the whole cluster sometimes, that are put into those phenomenal historical vats that are really bringing a grape into the first stage of a wine. So Brian, let's have a toast.
The harvest.
Another phenomenal harvest. 2020 will be historical, right?
Without a doubt.
So come with us. We're going up. We're going to climb. Hopefully we'll fall, because it's very fun to fall in the tank and to enjoy the grapes. My sister and my lovely wife Gina loves when I go in the tanks. My legs become so soft. Much better than a spa. Maybe we should call it the Buena Vista Spa. So let's go up. So, dear friends, this is like going onto the Everest or the Monte Picchu. This is the highest moment of spirituality. This is where we could feel the chakra totally aligned. Could you feel your throat chakra excited?
Yes.
Could you feel your solar plexus in line?
Something's getting done.
And I could feel my third eye being inspired by this fantastic smell. So now we're going to take what we call a Pigeage in very good French. Brian, in English it's called
We call it a punch down stick.
Punch down stick. And what are we going to do? And we're going to invite you to come closer. We're going to push down slowly. And Brian, maybe you want to explain what I'm doing.
Yeah, so as the fermentation happens, the grapes themselves start to float to the top of the tank. And if they float to the top, it doesn't give the yeast a chance to convert the sugar within those berries into alcohol. And so we want to refresh it. We want to push it down, let that juice come up and gently cascade over those berries. At the same time, this allows us, besides doing the fermentation, to extract out more of the colors and more of the flavors. It's a delicate dance. If we do it too hard, we end up with hard wines, we end up with bitter wines. And so we call it a punch down, but in many ways it's more about the pulling up to get that juice to flow over the berries in a very gentle fashion.
So now we should invite you to come and see on top of the tank how beautiful it is. You'll see it's artistic, it's fabulous, and you see that transformation of the berries into alcohol. Let's go. So it's a very exciting physical work because you basically have to gently push in, turn a little bit, very similar to a spoon, and then the art is to pull and go clockwise to create chaos and counterclockwise to bring energy in. And this is a very delicate dance, as Brian was saying. I was born in the 60s and in the 80s with Michael Jackson. It's much easier, of course. We have the hip movement. So it's actually quite hard. And we call it, typically in colloquial language, the cake. So there's a cake.
The cap.
Well, in French we call it we call it the cake, le gâteau.
Okay.
And that cap is that very solid part on the top that forms itself. And you basically have to break gently the cake. You know, in French, everything has to do with food.
Yes, the cap, breaking the cap in English, in America at least, it is a very tricky thing because all of a sudden you go from a lot of pressure. The cap is very firm, and usually you have in a tank like this 8 inches of grape solids that are all pressed up on the top. But as soon as you punch through that, all of a sudden it's just liquid, and the stick itself will fall through. And it's a very careful balance to make sure you don't fall through with it because I don't know if those shoes would survive a trip into the ferment.
Well, luckily, Brian and I have done many punch downs together, and we've actually gone with our legs, and it's very gentle and it's very good for your skin,
yes.
Right?
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
And I think it really brings the energy by hand of the winemaker, of Adrian here at Buena Vista, who really takes care and love and passion and great attention, because this is the first contact, besides harvesting the grapes, to really bring your soul, bring your personality, your identity into the wine. So how many punch down do we do typically here?
Well, on an average day, we'll do 2 during the fermentation. If the fermentation is very, very active, it's starting to heat up, we may add a 3rd or a 4th, but that's unusual. Typically, it's 2 per day, and then as we get towards the end of fermentation, we'll actually only do a single punch down, just enough to keep that cap wet and the yeast nice and happy and healthy.
So it's like breakfast and dinner, right? One in the morning, one in the evening.
Exactly.
And Brian, explain all of us the idea behind the extended maceration and extended fermentation.
Well, when we have phenomenal vintages out of great vineyards, the concentration in those skins often doesn't all come out within the first few days of fermentation. We'll usually have to then extend it out. And what that means is that we put our lids on these tanks, and then just once a day we'll keep that just a soft amount of juice flowing over those skins and very gently coaxing out the last little bits of those fine-grained tannins as well as that color. Typically with Pinot Noir, we may extend that over a week past the end of fermentation, but it has to be phenomenal.
So altogether, how many weeks?
Up to 3 weeks with our Pinot Noirs.
Yeah, so we typically say 1 degree Celsius a day up to the moment it reaches the body temperature. In Celsius, 37.4, then fermentation is actually accomplished. So this is very exciting because if you gentle, just like making a sauce or reduction or wine sauce, you go very much step by step. 1 degree a day. Let's say you start at 12 to 14, 21 days later, there you are, and fermentation is finished. Now, Brian, this year, no whole cluster.
No, what we saw with the heat that we saw in August and early September, it really drove ripeness in the vineyards quite quickly, and so we didn't see that natural slow lignification of the stems. That's a decision we have to make while we're out in the field, looking at the clusters, how they're developing, and so we decided against whole cluster fermentation. When we have those longer growing seasons, that's when we're able to harvest those stems and use them in the fermentation.
So explain what the stems, and dear friends, I'm breathing hard, not because of the efforts, although it's a powerful effort, it's good bodybuilding exercise, it's because of what we start to feel.
Yes, the carbon dioxide right now is definitely pouring off this fermentation. We are right at the start when the yeast are very happy, and a lot of that sugar, not only is it being converted into alcohol, it's also being converted into carbon dioxide. And so that's one of the other things we have to be cautious with when we're doing these punch downs, is not to be overwhelmed by the fumes. In terms of the whole cluster and the usage of stems, it really comes down to the nature of those ripe stems. The woodiness of the stems really gives you a different dimension within the mouth, and it changes the nature of the fermentation. It's more spicy, it's more textured, it's also typically quite a bit slower. Our whole cluster fermentations can go over a month long in terms of the time before that is completely converted into alcohol.
Yeah. Which we love, and we have other tanks that are cement, and the big accompany to whole cluster is cement. All techniques of Burgundy, I'm thinking of Mr. Jaillet as an example, who's been kind of the leader of reintroducing whole cluster. And when you think about the barrels, it's a great addition to the evolution of the wine, but the whole cluster, the cluster itself brings a lot of those beautiful natural tannins. It's
very similar to the wood tannins, the stem tannins that you get. And that's why when we can use them, when we have that vintage that allows us to use those stems, we're very excited, and the wines typically are phenomenal.
Well, talking about phenomenal wines, Brian, so a few years ago, that same tank welcomed this wine. So tell us about it, because this is Vinicultural Society.
Yes. Well, the Heinz vineyard that we have here today often goes into our Ida's Pinot Noir, as well as the Chardonnay from that vineyard going into the Natalias. And we try and craft our Vinicultural Society wines to the utmost, representing the terroirs that they come from, whether it's the Sonoma Coast or the Sonoma Mountains, and then of course the pinnacle being our private reserve, the blend of all those great appellations throughout Sonoma.
Wow, this is magnificent. So how long was that fermentation?
So most of our Pinot Noir fermentations coming out of that part of the Sonoma Coast typically go for between 14 and 20 days. Some of those vineyards, in vintages like 2016 and 2018, we were able to do whole cluster fermentations, and so those would have gone a little bit longer than that.
Very exciting, dear friends. This is the time you need to come and see us at the winery, enjoy the sorting tables, enjoy the beautiful aromatic expression of the caves, because this is a basket of red berries, raspberries, strawberries, blueberries, everything is here with us. It's really the apotheotic moment that we love the most.
It is fantastic, and over the next week, we'll be bringing in a harvest of many different varieties with Zinfandel, Syrah, Valdegay, all coming into our cellars here at Buena Vista. So you'll be able to see our team as they bring the bins of grapes and put them across the sorting table, selecting out the very best to make our Vinicultural Society wines.
So we have a society. It's very secret. We cannot tell you much about it. So I'm going to take off my Louboutin shoes. I'm going to keep my lovely JCB Red Sox. And now we're going to cut, because I'm going to do something that you'll have to come if you want to see it. Are you ready, Brian?
Sure.
Let's go.